that was a lot of a lengthy and detailed scripture reading. What I'll be talking about is kind of more of a high level look at that. You'll probably all be relieved to hear. So Beth told you a little bit about me. In addition, I can tell you that I'm the mother of two young adults, one who lives with me still and one who is doing their master's degree in Montreal. I'm not sure I'd call myself an athlete, but I enjoy athletic type activities, jogging, cycling, team sports. And finally, I am a lawyer. That engenders reactions in people. The specific reaction that you have might depend on your background and past encounters. Something that's interesting about lawyers is that we go to law school for 3 years. And at law school, and I know there's other lawyers here, they teach you to think in a very specific way. And it's a way that kind of involves paying attention to detail and looking at those details and seeing if there's any inconsistencies, if there's anything that doesn't support the underlying issue or principle, things that you can, and you really look at them as like little threads you can pull out to cause things to unravel. That kind of process sometimes leads to people not liking to be around you very much, or at least rolling their eyes when you start thinking or talking like a lawyer. And I'll give you an example about this in my life. Like I said, I like sports. I was on a softball team a couple decades ago. It was super chill softball team, slow pitch. We were really just there to have a good time, hang out with each other. Nobody was hyper competitive, maybe surprisingly, because there was other lawyers there, but very relaxed. So we play softball. We got to the field. The other team was at the field. They were short a couple players. And as a result, they had to call in some people who didn't usually play for them. And they were people who were clearly used to a higher level of softball. They were very, very into being very good at softball. And so that's fine. We'll play the game. We get on the field. This one guy, one of the new players, comes up to bat. One of the ringers comes up to bat and like he hits this line drive right back at our pitcher, just about takes her head off. Like she ducks, it goes over her head, she's fine. And we all glare at him because that is not how we play. We don't kill people. And he clearly didn't know that. He got on base and scored a run and he went back into the dugout and somebody from his team took him aside and was like, no, that's not how we play in this league. Don't do that anymore. And so a couple innings later, he comes back up to the plate. And at this point, I'm the catcher. Our poor pitcher is still the same pitcher. And before he comes up to bat, he steps back and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry about what happened last time. It was an accident. It won't happen again." So great. Now, there's at least 2 ways to respond to that, right? And the first way is how our pitcher responded to it very graciously. Yes, sure, no problem, no sweat. And the second way is to kind of think about what he said and spot the logical inconsistency and point it out, which is how I responded to it. And I said to him, if it was an accident, how do you know it won't happen again? Which, I think is a fair question, but earned me quite a look from him. And also from down on third base, where my then partner was playing, the comment, "Welcome to my life." So again, looking at things like a lawyer, you have to be able to step back from that from time to time. Now, as a lawyer and as someone who does like to kind of delve into the fine details, it's probably appropriate that the text comes from the book of Leviticus. Leviticus can certainly be described as overflowing in granular details. Leviticus, the third book of the Old Testament, is about holiness, both God's holiness and the holiness he expects of his people, that question of being set apart, separate, and following God's law. But paying attention to those granular details like I said, is only part of what we do as lawyers. And you've probably heard people talk about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And so again, it's important to not just look at what the words say, but what the underlying meaning and purpose is and how that can be worked out in practice. And so today, what I want to focus on from the passage is at a bit of a higher level, not necessarily the granular details. Again, you'll be relieved to hear. Okay, and so you'll know that, as Beth has said, the title of the message is Enough, and that's because I failed to think up a more interesting name. But because the message is about, is part of a series that we're doing about our different shared practices. One of which is Enough. And those shared practices can be found in the Belonging Handbook, and that's available. You can access that on the church website. And if you haven't had a chance to, there's a lot of really good, really interesting information there that is really worth kind of engaging with. Okay, so the shared practice of enough, what does that mean? And again, I wanted to put that in context from what is outlined in the handbook. And what the handbook says is we live in a society with a mindset of scarcity and stockpiling, which is even more prevalent in an expensive city like Vancouver. We counter this with the radical claim that our God is overflowing in abundance. God made more than enough daily bread for everyone to share. We believe nothing we have really belongs to us. It belongs to our Creator. We are tenants and stewards of our land, our money, our possessions, and our homes, charged with taking care of them for a time for the benefit of all. We are called to care for the earth and to use only what we need. Any surplus already belongs to someone else. So we practice redistributing it, trusting that God will continue to provide for us. It's not always easy to discern how to do this well, so we learn from one another and try things in community. So another part of kind of what they teach you in law school is the importance of defined terms, of knowing what we're talking about. And so when I look at that passage, and in the first sentence, it talks about a mindset of scarcity, I ask myself, what does that mean? And because it is a concept, if you look in different places, you'll see it defined a little bit differently. But I think generally, and for the purposes of this message, scarcity mindset is talking about a belief that resources, opportunities, and success are limited and hard to come by. Kind of a zero-sum understanding of those resources, opportunities, and success. So a belief that if someone else has more of something, that means I have less of it, because there's a finite amount of those resources. And so then a sense that we're in competition with each other. All of which leads to a fear of not having enough, of not being enough, and that we won't be able to secure what we need for our well-being. So when we talk about, or at least when I'm talking about scarcity mindset, that's what I'm talking about. So the next question is, like, why do we have this? Why is this so prevalent? And here I want to make the point, or I want to suggest that there are societal and cultural and structural reasons why this type of mindset exists and is so common. And that those are precisely the factors that we need to push back against to get out from under the scarcity mindset. We don't always think about, this mindset as being a systemic problem. There's a lot in traditional church teachings and kind of in society generally that kind of tells us that even where this kind of scarcity mindset is identified as a problem, oh yes, this is a problem, essentially prescribes individualistic solutions. So, for example, in traditional church teachings, what are we taught? We shouldn't worry, right? We're like the lilies of the field, like the birds of the air. God will provide for us. And the only reason you're worried is because you lack faith. And if you just worked harder and trusted God more, you wouldn't have to worry. And I think, those of us who grew up in that environment have found that too often that can become a further burden, a further example of how we're not enough, right? I don't trust God enough now. Why am I worried? I'm not doing it well enough. I'm not working hard enough at this trusting God thing. And that's not limited to the church. I think it's quite common throughout our society, our Western society as a whole, right? How do you fix this? Well, you just have to work harder to change your wrong thinking. So, and I have the perfect example of this from one of the YouTube videos I was looking at when I was kind of, preparing for this and kind of learning more about scarcity mindset. The video on YouTube was called Scarcity Mindset in 2 Minutes because, time is scarce. And it actually included, I'm not even paraphrasing, it included the line that, so one example of scarcity mindset is if you're worried that you don't have enough money. To overcome scarcity mindset, you need to think, the fact that I don't have enough money doesn't mean that there isn't enough money in the world. It just means that I have to learn how to handle more money. Now, possibly I should have been tipped off by the fact that the YouTube channel was owned by a guy called Productivity Guy. But in any event, it's not a helpful tip. Nothing is useful about that. And one of the things that both of these proposed solutions are lacking is kind of grappling with the roots of the scarcity mindset. Because scarcity mindset isn't rooted primarily in our own individual failure of faith or failure of thinking. It's rooted in the broader culture. And what are some aspects of that broader culture? Well, for example, as River was saying, capitalism, right? About individual acquisition, where individuals are primarily defined by their ability to work, their relationship to business or to the market, where there's this view that I need to provide for myself. I need to get out there and earn that money and provide for myself, and I need to accumulate more and more. So that's one aspect of culture, and these are all interconnected, of course. But another one is kind of a broader white supremacy culture. Now, many of you might be familiar with that term. For those who aren't familiar with what, the term or the concept of white supremacy culture, that can land as a bit confronting, but essentially, it just describes a number of related characteristics which serve to reinforce existing power relationships and structures. And those characteristics include some of the characteristics that people have already talked about today: perfectionism, a sense of urgency, the importance of quantity over quality, either or black and white thinking, power hoarding, and individualism, among others. And all of those, I think you can see how they would feed a scarcity mindset. I need more now. To get more, I have to take away from someone else, and I should gather as much as I can. And the way that the principles underpinning a scarcity mindset are baked into Western culture, including church culture, means I think that scarcity mindset isn't at its root a problem for each of us to struggle with as individuals, to pray for an attitude of gratitude, to learn that I just need to better understand how to deal with money, whatever. But what I would suggest is that God doesn't mean for us to take that on as individuals, as an individual burden, as an individual heaviness, as just another way for us to feel that we aren't enough or that we're falling short. Pushing back against the scarcity mindset, pushing towards enough, is something God is calling us to do in community and gives us the opportunity to do in community. And so now I just want to step back into the passage and again, hit some high level points. What are some of the key components, like what's being described in the passage, and what are some of the key components? So the first thing the passage talks about is that just as there's a Sabbath rest for the people of Israel on the seventh day, there's to be a Sabbath rest for the land every seventh year. The land is to lie fallow, don't sow the fields, don't prune the vineyards. The Israelites, their servants, their livestock, and even the wild animals are allowed to eat what the land produces of itself in that Sabbath year, as well as what they've stored from previous years. And the promise is that there will be enough for all. And then the text goes on to speak of something beyond that, a Sabbath of Sabbaths, the year of Jubilee. And they do some tricky math, right? The year is set by counting off 7 Sabbaths of years, or 7 times 7. And then the 50th year is to be the year of Jubilee. And in this 50th year, again, the land is to lie fallow as it does in the Sabbath year, but it goes beyond that. And the people of Israel are instructed that each of them shall return to their ancestral land and clan, that debts are to be forgiven, that slaves are to be set free, and that land is to be returned to its original owners or their descendants. And this vision of liberation is based on primarily 2 underpinnings. The first is that the land doesn't belong to the people, to the person who buys it. It belongs to God. And landowners may hold the property, but God is the ultimate owner. Similarly, Israelites are not to be anyone's slaves because they are God's people and nobody else can own them. Both the land and the people belong to the Lord, and so both are released in the Jubilee from any other claim on them. And one of the things that's striking about this passage is how much of a communal experience Jubilee is. First, everyone is returning to their family property and to their extended family. They're gathered back into community. Those who have sold their land because they've fallen on hard times, that land can be returned. If people have had to sell themselves into slavery, they are to be released again to return to their extended family and family property, again, gathered back into community. The Jubilee practices aren't individual practices, but are common practices of the community. Centrally, this isn't done by individuals deciding to change their individual mindsets. I just need to think myself out of slavery, that'll work. Or having more faith. It's a commitment of the community as a whole to care for each other, to be prepared to give and to receive, to be prepared to be the one releasing and the one released, to be flexible and creative in providing for and seeking support from others, to celebrate when God provides us with the opportunity to help others or receive help, sometimes in unexpected ways. And I wanted to give a shout out to the church emails, which often lists a variety of ways that people need help or can give help. And it gives us a really excellent opportunity to, consider whether we can provide or be provided for. Now, an interesting notation about the Jubilee concept is that, from what I understand, there isn't a strong historical record of it actually being practiced. That doesn't mean that it wasn't, but we don't have necessarily a lot of historical evidence of that. But that concept continues to be drawn on as we move through the Bible. So notably, Isaiah 61 in a verse of prophecy refers to the year of the Lord's favor, which some have said, this is kind of picking up on that idea of Jubilee. When the prophet says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then in the New Testament, this is the passage that Jesus reads in the temple in Luke 4, where he reads that passage. He unrolls the scripture, he reads the passage, and he says, "Today, the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." So as a principle, it's one that Jesus has fully taken on and identified himself with. A vision of economic justice and liberation, releasing all of us from captivity in its many forms, freeing us to love and serve each other. And so I would encourage us that the practice of enough is, first of all, just that, a practice, something that we continually have to work out in our own lives, but most of all through community, learning with and from each other and taking the opportunities that God presents to us, all, as the Shared Practice Handbook says, while recognizing that all is gift and all is grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tonie.